The attorney pushes a manila envelope across the conference table, and my sister Renata refuses to touch it. Her eyes drift instead to the painting hanging on the wall, a watercolor of the Kars Plateau our father picked up from a market vendor in Ljubljana back in 1987. She has studied every inch of that painting. She spent her entire childhood underneath it. The attorney clears his throat. Renata still doesn't reach for the envelope. She turns to look at me. I look back at her, and in that room, surrounded by 4 attorneys and a paralegal, with my brother-in-law's palms pressed flat against the table and my mother's second husband sitting perfectly, unnervingly still, I say quietly, "Go ahead, open it." She does. The figure on the first page reads $31,400,000, and the name printed on the document is not Renata's. Welcome to Calm Revenge Tales. This channel exists for the people who waited, for those who kept their mouths shut, their records spotless, and their conscience clean, even when doing so came at a cost. If that describes you, subscribe now, because justice in this story doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives the way my father taught me to handle everything: delayed, precise, and already finished. My name is Teodora Vasex. I am a forensic accountant. I have been one for 22 years, and I mention that not to impress anyone, but to explain why nothing that follows caught me off guard. My profession is the language of hidden things. Accounts buried inside accounts. Structures concealed within structures. I locate money that people were certain could never be found, and I testify about what I uncover in rooms where lying carries legal consequences. I was competent at this work before my parents died. I became extraordinary at it afterward. The person this story is truly about is my Aunt Margaret, my father's younger sister. She was 63 years old when our story begins, and she had lived with my parents for 31 of those years, ever since the car accident that killed her husband and left her with a permanent limp and a grief she never once talked about. She cooked. She kept the household running. She drove my mother to chemotherapy twice a week for 14 months and was never offered a single euro toward fuel costs. I covered the fuel myself. I did it quietly, without telling either of them, because the point was never the money. The point was that Margaret deserved not to be ground down by small indignities. My parents loved Margaret the way you love furniture you've stopped noticing. My sister Renata treated her like a member of the household staff. I treated her like what she was, the only genuinely honest person in that entire family. The dinner was my mother's idea, which meant it was Renata's idea. My mother called it a family reconciliation dinner, a phrase she had not used in the 12 years since Renata and I had last spoken directly to one another. Renata relayed 3 conditions through my mother via a voice message I still have saved. I was not to bring my partner. I was not to mention my work. And I was not to speak with Margaret about anything financial. That 3rd condition told me everything I needed to understand about what was happening. I went anyway. Margaret had asked me to come. She called on a Tuesday morning, and I could tell from the particular echo bouncing off the old stone tile that she was standing in the kitchen. She said, "Teddy, come to dinner. I need you to see something." That was the whole message. I wrote it in my notebook. The date, the time, the exact words. I arrived at the house in Book, the family villa from the 1930s with the clay tile roof and the walnut tree in the back garden, on a Saturday in late October. Renata was already there with her husband Csaba and their 2 adult sons. My mother sat at the head of the table where she had sat for 40 years. Margit moved back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room, carrying dishes that Renata and Csaba accepted without acknowledgement. Renata embraced me at the door with the warmth of someone executing a performance. She smelled like expensive perfume and calculated decisions. Her husband shook my hand without making eye contact. One of her sons glanced up from his phone for a moment before looking back down. The walnut tree outside had shed its leaves. The bare branches pressed sharp and dark against the gray sky like a signature on a pale document. Over soup, the gulyas Margit had made from proper beef shank, the kind that takes 4 full hours on the stove. My mother mentioned in passing that she had updated a few matters with the family estate lawyer. She placed it between 2 other sentences the way you hide a clause in a contract. Renata refilled her own wine glass. Chaba nodded once. Margit stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room, holding a bread basket and watching me. I ate the gulyas. It was perfect. It was always perfect. The breaking point came after dessert. My mother asked Margit to clear the table. Margit set down the bread basket and began gathering plates. Renata said without looking up, "While you're at it, pack up the blue china. I'm taking it to Budapest next week." The blue china belonged to Margit. Her mother had given it to her. When Margit moved into the house after the accident, she had brought almost nothing with her. She had brought the china. Margit's hands went still over the stack of plates. "That china belongs to me," she said. Renata looked up for the first time. "Everything in this house belongs to the estate, and the estate is now being managed." My mother said nothing. She studied the tablecloth. "That is not true," Margit said. Her voice was completely steady. "I have the provenance records. My mother bought it in Vienna in 1961. "Then you may submit a claim," Renata said, "through the appropriate channels." Chaba looked out the window. One of the sons shifted in his chair. The other found something compelling on the ceiling. I said, "Renata?" She turned to me with a particular expression I recognized immediately, the careful arrangement of a face preparing to act as though it has been wronged. "Don't," she said. "You have no seat at this table." I said, "The table is where you sit. It isn't who you are." She said, "You've been removed from the estate. You know that." Mother made her position clear. I stood up. I folded my napkin. I placed it on my plate with complete precision. I said, "Margit, get your coat." Margit looked at me. She gave one small nod. She walked to the hallway. One of Renata's sons started to open his mouth. His father placed a hand on his arm. The son went quiet. We left. I drove. Margit sat beside me with her hands folded in her lap, watching the road ahead. After about 10 minutes, she said, "You didn't finish the gulyas." "I had enough," I said. She nodded. The fields outside were dark. We drove on. We moved Margit's belongings out on Thursday. It took 4 hours across 2 trips. Everything she owned fit into a 2-bedroom apartment in Szombathely that I had already located 3 weeks before the dinner, because I had already understood what that dinner was going to be. I covered the first year's rent. She didn't argue. She had learned over time that arguing with me about money was like arguing with a river about which way to flow. My own situation required very little adjustment. I had been supporting myself entirely without depending on any family asset. I had never borrowed from my parents, never accepted a share of anything, never appeared in a document that mattered. Renata received the house. Renata received the accounts as declared and documented, totaling approximately 840,000 euros after costs. The will was entirely legal. I had read it myself and had it reviewed independently. It was sealed tight on everything it addressed. What it addressed was that I received nothing. I was completely at peace with this. I am a forensic accountant. I understand the difference between what a document says and what is actually true. The mystery arrived 6 weeks after the funeral, a thin, padded envelope in my mailbox, addressed in my father's handwriting, which I knew instantly, though he had been dead for 3 months by the time it appeared. The postmark was from his attorney's office. Inside was a single, old brass key, the kind that opens a safety deposit box, and a folded index card reading only, Raiffeisen Veszprém branch. Her name is on it, too. I placed the key in the inside pocket of my winter coat. I didn't travel to Veszprém that week. I went to see Margit instead. She had arranged her apartment with the quiet efficiency of someone who had lived small before and knew how to make limited space feel solid. The blue china sat on a shelf she had built herself, slightly crooked but holding. I looked at it. She watched me look at it. Renata called. She said, "She wants me to sign something." "Don't," I said. "I know." A brief pause. I've already retained my own attorney. She had employed a lawyer for 6 years, as it turned out. She had been paying him quarterly retainers. I found this so unexpectedly wonderful that I had to turn toward the window. She made me tea. Barak Kostia apricot. She had a jar of her own preserves on the counter, the kind she made every August from the apricot trees in the neighboring garden, the ones she had tended for 30 years. She gave me a jar to bring home. I still have it. It is the only jar I have not opened. Renata's second call came in January. She offered me 8% of the declared estate, approximately 67,000 euros, in exchange for signing a document releasing any future claims. Through my own attorney, I declined. Her third call came in February. She asked whether I had found anything among my father's personal effects. Her voice was measured and her phrasing deliberate. I said I had not found anything relevant. This was technically accurate at the time I said it. I still hadn't made the drive to Veszprém. I kept running my fingers over the key through the coat pocket on the way home. Through the fabric, it felt the same temperature as everything around it, the way ordinary objects feel before you understand what they actually are. If you're watching this and wondering how a story like this concludes, subscribe right now so the rest of it reaches you. Because where we're headed, the numbers are very specific and the silence has been accumulating for a very long time. Margit had a stroke in March. A minor one, the doctors said. She was hospitalized for 11 days. I was there every day except 2, when I was in Veszprém. She recovered almost entirely, with a slight tremor remaining in her left hand. She said it didn't affect her cooking. She died in September, 7 months later, not from the stroke, but from a cancer that had been dormant for years and chose that autumn to make itself known. She spent her final 3 weeks in the hospital. I slept in the chair beside her bed more nights than I kept count of. On the second to last night, she held my hand and said, "The key was for both of us. It always was." I said, "I know." She said, "He was proud of you. He was never good at expressing it." I didn't answer that one. Her final words to me on the last morning were simple. She said, "Make it count." I sat beside her until the end. Then I drove to a roadside diner, ordered coffee and a kifli, and sat at the counter alone for an hour without speaking. Then I went to work. The Raiffeisen branch in Veszprém had a pleasant manager named Bence, who confirmed my identification and my authorization documents, then led me to the vault. The safety deposit box was registered under 2 names, my father's and Margit's, not mine, not Renata's. Inside was a secondary key, a handwritten letter from my father dated 4 years before his death, and the access credentials for a fiduciary account in Luxembourg. I sat in that vault room for 40 minutes and read everything twice. Through 3 decades of strategic consulting work during Central European privatization, my father had accumulated a separate asset structure entirely outside his declared estate. The structure was legal, meticulously, deliberately, exhaustingly legal. He had engaged a fiduciary firm in Luxembourg, established a trust with 2 named beneficiaries, and appointed a trustee executor with specific instructions to release all documentation 1 year after both his death and Margit's death, or immediately upon the beneficiaries presenting the physical key. The total value of the trust, $31,400,000. The 2 beneficiaries, Margit Vasek-Horvath and Theodora Vasek. Since Margit had died before accessing the trust, her share passed, per the trust document, entirely to me. I arranged the disclosure meeting myself. I reserved the conference room. I invited Renata, Csaba, their estate attorney, and the family lawyer who had administered the declared estate. My own attorney sat beside me. I placed the brass key on the table in front of me when I sat down. No one in that room yet understood what it was. The Luxembourg trustee's representative opened the proceedings. He was precise and unhurried. He walked through the trust structure, the legal history, the valuation. He stated the amount twice, in both euros and dollars, so there would be no ambiguity. Renata said, "That's not possible." The representative said, "I assure you it is." Renata said louder, "He would have told me." Her husband's hands went flat on the table. Her estate attorney studied the ceiling. One of her sons, the older one, the one who had almost spoken at the dinner table years before, went visibly pale. I watched his jaw tighten and recognized in it something I understood completely. The specific expression of someone doing rapid mental arithmetic and arriving at a figure they don't want. Renata's second attorney began performing anguish. He spoke of the family's suffering. He raised the complexity of the estate process. He invoked reconciliation. He was still invoking it when my attorney set the trust documentation, fully tabbed and indexed, before each person at the table. I waited until the room went quiet. Then I said, "The key opens the box." The box was registered in Margit's name and mine. She told me at the end to make it count. I picked up the key. I held it for a moment, then I set it back down. "He was proud of her," I said. "He was never good at saying it. He said it this way instead." Renata looked at the key the way people look at something they cannot argue against. The older son looked at the floor. He was the one I watched most carefully throughout. He was the one who had nearly spoken at that dinner table. He grasped something in that room that the others hadn't reached yet. I did not turn this against him. I noted it, and I let it go. The trust was transferred over the following 90 days. Renata's attorneys filed 2 legal challenges. Both were dismissed within 60 days. The trust structure was watertight in the specific, tedious, beautiful way that 30 years of careful preparation produces. I offered Renata a meeting before the first dismissal. I offered to discuss a voluntary settlement, something modest, proportional, a gesture of goodwill, not because I owed her anything, but because I wanted to be the kind of person who makes the offer. She declined the meeting. She had her attorney send a letter characterizing the trust as a deliberate act of cruelty against the family. The document she sent through that attorney was the same document she had circulated years earlier, demanding I sign away any future claims, the one I had declined in January. She had used it as a weapon. I used it in the judicial summary as evidence that she had prior awareness of potential competing interests, which directly undermined her argument of good faith in the original estate proceedings. The walnut tree and book is still standing. The house sold 18 months later when Renata and Chaba moved away. I came across this through no one in particular and confirmed it without any particular feeling about it. The blue china is in my apartment now. I purchased it at the estate sale for €240, fair market value as determined by the appraiser, which the estate required for any asset transfer. Renata had established those rules. I simply followed them. My apartment has a large window. In the mornings, the light that comes through it falls on the shelf where the blue china sits, and the glaze catches that light for a long moment before releasing it. The jar of apricot preserves sits on the counter beside it. Margit made it. I'm not certain I will ever open it. Some things hold more value preserved than consumed. I am good at my work. I was good at it before any of this happened. I am better at it now. Not sharper exactly, but quieter, more patient. Capable of sitting with an unopened envelope and understanding that what's inside has already occurred, that waiting doesn't alter it, and rushing doesn't alter it. And the only thing that genuinely matters is that when the moment finally comes, you are ready and you are right. Margit said, "Make it count." I think about that every single morning when I put on my coat. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who has been waiting. Leave a comment and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. This channel exists for the people who do the quiet work and outlast the noise. I'll see you in the next one.